From college campuses to Congress, they call it Democratic Socialism. But what does the term really mean? What's driving this movement? Where is it taking us? And what does that mean for us as the rest of the country? Next on the Conservative Rule, we'll break it down. The election of Sohar Mamdani should be a clear-cut indicator that socialism is on the rise in America. During his campaign rallies, many people shouted "freeze the rent" and popular slogans like that. Freeze the rent, free buses. Completely and utterly in a frenzy when it came to shouting these slogans. And the funny thing about socialism, that it comes with receipts. I'm assuming to many in that crowd, a lot of the things he's proposing are new, because obviously they haven't picked up a book or have seen any historical president before that. Because anybody that knows anything about socialism knows that everywhere it's been tried, it's failed. It's perplexing. It's a perplexing thing to see in America today. Young people in college campuses indoctrinated by their teachers, I can somewhat understand. When you have hordes of people upwards of 40 years old shouting these things, it's extremely problematic. And it off topic a little bit, why the education department should be abolished in the United States, because it hasn't succeeded. Well, it succeeded in forwarding communism, if nothing else. But what led us to this particular instance in society, that we have people fully embracing socialism? And Glenn Beck had in his podcast a very interesting point as to, economically speaking, where it's heading and why the cause of the situation. I'll share this clip with you and then we'll react.
You're seeing, oh my gosh, look at the stock market is up. All of these things are going up. Well, that's great. Some rise, some sink, but the gap is widening here. The K at the very beginning, where the two lines meet, is very, very close to each other. But as they keep going, those lines become further and further apart.
So as you saw from that clip, he clearly explained how the gap is widening between the people at the bottom and the people at the top. And I honestly believe that there's a few things that we need to be doing if we want to improve our situation and if we want to run away from socialism. Because it's easy to blame socialism, which I'm going to take a bunch of jabs at. I don't want to deviate, but there's something that we must acknowledge in a capitalist system, that it doesn't work for everybody. And it's not that we have to make it work for everybody, but we have to find a way that people can stay afloat, because it doesn't matter. I can sit here not 1 hour, not 2 hours, 3 hours. I can spend here a 24-hour podcast on socialism. And if your pocketbook is not right, then nothing I said will ever matter to you, and understandably so. And my motivations for jabbing and taking stabs at socialism, it's purely economical. It's not political. And my main motivation for voting any politically active is financial and not political. Because if your pocketbook's not right, nothing else matters. You have to be right in life. Republicans are being controlled, and if you're suffering, it's not going to matter. But here's a few key points that I want to bring up. And Trump is working on some of those, and I wish he'll focus on other things and get off the Israel stuff and get off some of these other things that are not really important right now. And the first one to me is reshoring jobs. We have to reshore jobs to America. People got to be able to make a living with a GED. Because if you're going to come out of college thousands of dollars in debt and to go get a job and you can't even pay back your loans, or you can't make a living, then what's the point of it all? That's why when he's taking steps to dismantle the Department of Education, it has to happen, because they have not been successful since its inception. Education has gotten worse in America since, I believe it was founded in 1979. So as old as I am, it's 45, and it hasn't worked. And not to deviate from the topic, but it's something that has to happen. Decoupling from China, getting cheap plastic shipped from China, is something that we got to get back into the United States of producing things. Because Tucker Carlson made a point of this in his podcast, and it had a profound effect on me, which is true. Real estate, that's not a sound economic plan. It's like you said, you're just buying a piece of land and reselling it. How is that an effective economic plan? And not everybody can have a stake in real estate. Financing, who you got to have capital to be able to invest in financing. So these key points need to be addressed if we're going to move forward. Energy independence as well. In Georgia, key House rates in the state assembly, there were lost because energy prices never dropped in Georgia. So that's a hit that the Republicans took because I never dropped. Their energy independence, drill baby drill that we've been promised, I haven't seen it. Gas prices have dropped, but they haven't dropped to Trump won. In my opinion, we need to get back to Trump won, and it didn't matter because in 2018 he lost the House. So, but if people are not hurting as much, it makes a difference electorally speaking. Reshift in training and education, and this is to me is big. AI is taking over, robotics are taking over, and you still got people going to college for liberal art degrees. No, we need people that are going to get dirty. We need people that are going to get into the manufacturing. I know a lot of the things done by robots. So these robots are not going to last forever. And eventually they're going to need maintenance. They're going to need people to keep up with this equipment for them to keep functioning. We need people to do that. We need more plumbers. We need more electricians. Immigration control. And this is, I feel, completely related to the education and reshifting and training. Because if we have that many people here that need jobs competing with American citizens, and the jobs are a matter of manual labor, they're not a matter of education or whatever might have you, then competing with these people is going to make life harder on us. A shift to immigration control is something that it has to happen, and I'm all on board with all the mass deportations. We're competing for housing, we're competing for jobs, we're competing for endless amounts of things that we have no business doing. We're not at the point in this country where we can take in a bunch of people and offer them stuff and house them and keep them here. $38 trillion debt, we can't do that. But back to socialism. And again, here's another clip by Glenn Beck. I'm sorry, beg your pardon. Speaking about socialism and how it's always the same, how the ones at the top control everything, and the ones at the bottom completely fade away. And people might say, oh, this is what's happening now. But here's the thing about socialism. The only thing that has been able to deliver is misery for everybody at the bottom. The daughter of Hugo Chavez reportedly says she's worth $4.1 million. Yet people in Venezuela are eating out of trash cans. They're killing the animals at the zoo so they can eat. And this is something that you're going to see repeatedly in case after case after case after case after case. And the defense is always going to be, well, they didn't do it right. That wasn't real socialism. That's always going to be the case. Every single failed socialist paradise that you show them, paradise to, not to us, but I'm being sarcastic, that you show them, they're always going to say it wasn't done right. Cuba, Venezuela, China, and the Sweden. We're gonna bring that up, obviously, and I'll touch on it a little. But I'll share that clip that Glenn Beck is referring to Hugo Chavez's daughter.
Eating the dogs and the cats in the streets, not making that up. Look it up yourself. And the zoo animals in the cages of the zoo were also being cooked up for people on the streets to eat. Hospitals lost their power. Children died from treatable diseases. Millions fled the country. And today, Venezuela sits on the largest proven oil reserves in the world. And yet people are standing in line for bread while the daughters of the socialist elite post photos of European vacations. What's happening to the fairness revolution there? It ended with a ruling class gorging on privilege and the nation digging through dumpsters for meals. That's the way it always happens. It's not an outlier. It's the rule. Look at Cuba, 1959, Fidel Castro. I'm quoting, "The revolution will bring justice, equality, education, and health care for all. Freedom from American exploitation." Che declared that Cuba would become an example of a new humanity. Well, what followed? Well, first thing they did was they shut down the independent newspapers. They were shut down by 1960. Then they imprisoned people in labor camps for being counter-revolutionary, including priests, teachers, and homosexuals. Yeah, that Che. Then food rationing began in 1962. By the way, food rationing in Cuba has never ended. Today, the average salary in Cuba is $15 a month. Now, the same Communist Party that claimed to abolish class created the most immovable ruling class in the Caribbean. And yet the billboards still show smiling peasants and slogans about equality, while the sons of party officials are driving imported cars through Havana's rotting streets, and everybody else has to fix a car from the 1950s. Remember, the promise was fairness, but the result was an island-sized cage.
So in that clip, he tackled Venezuela and a little bit of Cuba. And it's essentially the same story. Cuba in 1959, I believe the dollar, it was you had to turn in the exchange rate was 118 Cuban peso for $1. So the Cuban peso was actually more worth than the dollar. Fast forward to today, and you'll find walking around Havana, crumbling buildings, piles of trash everywhere, and people starving. And as he said, the descendants of Fidel Castro run around the island in exotic cars while people are starving in the street. Venezuela, the same case. So the only thing that it has delivered has been equal misery for everybody. And as a Cuban American, I'm intimately informed about some of the things that happen in Cuba, morally speaking. How some call it prostitution island. And the desperation, economic desperation of some people drives them to make desperate moves, drives them to make things they would never do before because of the desperation that they find themselves in. You have tourists that go to Cuba and exploit young women, young men for money, for sexual favors. And any Cuban American knows, or anybody, or any Cuban national, anybody, they know this to be true. And this is only this is the what the chaotic economical situation has brought to Cuba. This isn't a, it shouldn't be a secret. I don't know why it's not out there in the world for people to see. But all the talk about human trafficking, a lot there isn't human trafficking in Cuba. There's human exploitation in Cuba. Yet the government there doesn't do anything about it, of course, because everything's propaganda. Everything, the revolution has to be painted perfect. And let's tackle the excuses they're going to give you when it comes regarding to that. First, they're going to tell you that wasn't real socialism when it comes to Cuba and Venezuela. Well, that wasn't socialism. Then they're going to tell you the embargoes. The embargoes by the United States are the ones that keep these countries in the situation that they're in. But here's a key point that anybody, as a socialist, to dispute this. Chevy, Ford, I can't think of another American company right now off the top of my head. They can't go to Cuba. But what's stopping Kia? What's stopping Honda? What's stopping Toyota? What's stopping all these other foreign companies from going into Cuba and open dealerships there? What's stopping Cuba has very fertile ground. What's stopping them from trading with China, trading with other countries? They don't have to trade with the United States. What's stopping them? The embargo, they can't stop. The embargo can't stop that. And it's not like we have a naval blockade around the island stopping anything from entering Cuba. Explain this. They can't. They can't. And they're going to come back and hit you with what about Sweden? What about Sweden? Ask a socialist this, and this is a little bit of bullets to shoot them with, intellectually speaking. Ask them, socialism, the government controls the means of production. Ask them what industry in Sweden has the government has completely taken over and runs it, so they can sit there and say that it's socialism. And John Stossel had a very interesting interview with with a Swedish economist, and he wrote a couple of books, and he clearly explains socialism in Sweden and how even prominent people decouple away from that. But I'll let you see it for yourself.
All these celebrities and politicians say Sweden is socialist, a socialist success.
Well, Sweden is not socialist because the government doesn't own the means of production. To see that, you have to go to Venezuela or to Cuba or North Korea. But we did have a period in the 1970s and 1980s when we had something that resembled socialism, a big government that taxed and spent heavily. And that's the period in Swedish history when our economy was going
What can
south
America learn from
dramatically.
Sweden?
Well, you can learn both from the good and from the bad. The bad experiences we've had and others should learn from is don't get cocky. I mean, even though the economy might work very well, you have all this money, you're on top of the world, you can't turn your backs to the creation of wealth. That's what we did in the 1970s and 1980s, and just started to redistribute and make strange policy decisions that ran counter to any kind of economic orthodoxy. And that almost killed the Swedish economy. It almost ruined us completely. So you have to continue to create wealth in order to use it. The good thing to be learned from Sweden is how you reform the economy. I think it's important for the US and to learn from how you can introduce competition and choice in government services like education, for example. If you want a better future for our kids, you can learn how to reform those systems that we all rely on, the pension system, social security, things that are unsustainable with the kind of demographic future we have, unless we change this into more of defined contribution rather than defined benefits.
Either one example of successful so-called socialist countries, not even a socialist country. They have to revamp their economy. They have to decouple themselves from this nonsense and able to enrich the life of their citizens. And they have to keep creating wealth in order to be able to provide what it is they provide. But the point of this is not to advance any political system, any economic system. The point of this is just to highlight the truth and to awaken the public to the failures of socialism.
If they constantly buy and sell and negotiate, they begin to take other people's interests into consideration. That's what markets do. They do affect our character, but not in this way that the critics say that it makes us more divisive and aggressive and neglect the interests of others. It makes us more generous. And in fact, this is what Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels also said, those authors of another manifesto. They noticed that, look, the friendlier you are, the more beneficial it is to you in capitalism. And obviously they saw that as a bad thing. It wasn't real generosity. You were just being generous to help yourself. But I, for one, think it's better if we can get bad people to behave in good ways rather than good people behaving in bad ways, as we've seen in Marxist societies.
It's easy to debunk. And in the end of the day, it's all about rhetoric. It's about ideology, because an easy point that you can look at is Berlin, West Germany and East Germany. Nobody, and this is a simple thing that I wish they could debunk. Why was there nobody jumping the wall to go to East Germany from West Germany? Why all the traffic out? The people that even risked their lives to jump the Great Wall of Berlin were always coming from East, but from the communist East Berlin, East Germany to West Germany. Why is that? Ask a socialist this. Why there's never people from Florida heading to Cuba and it's the other way around from Cuba heading to Florida? I'm living proof of that. Socialism is so great. And the thing about them, why I want to raise awareness, is the fact that once you vote them in, there's no voting them out. Once they're in there, they're not releasing power. There's not going to be any 4-year elections. Fidel Castro promised elections that never happened to this day. 1959, 60-something odd years, they haven't happened. Speaking of that guy, another prominent socialist with dreams and fixing the aspirations of Cuba. He, unlike Mondami and the socialists now, swore up and down with his interviews with Hubert Matthews of the New York Times in the Sierra Maestra Mountains. And then he went to meet the press, Face the Nation, all these shows, all these Sunday shows here in America. He went on them a very long time ago, and he swore that he wasn't a communist. There was no communist in his ideas. The same thing, I'm for improving people's lives. Same old nonsense. 60 years later, look at the state of Cuba's in. Hugo Chavez said the same thing. I was elected to my post. I didn't take anything. Look at Venezuela. And I want to leave you with this parting thoughts regarding the socialists, the Democratic Socialists, as they call themselves, because they have to be elected. They want to be elected. They believe in democracy. Everything that you hold dear today, everything that you have, the possessions that you work hard for, your kids, the future that you want to bring your family, ask yourself this: do you want to maintain what you have? Forget about Republican, Democrat, socialist, communist, far right. Forget about all that. Work hard for your F-150 outside, your backyard, your deck, the German Shepherd you have. All these things that you value, that you want to maintain the quality of life that you have. Ask yourself, after all the information that I've given you and the examples that I mentioned, do you really think you're going to maintain those things? And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, they're just material things. They're not really important, family and friends and that. But how are you going to feel when your kids are struggling to eat? How are you going to feel? How do you think, put this example to you, how do you think people feel in Cuba when they know their young daughters are sleeping with tourists just to make enough money to buy food and underwear? How do you think those people feel? How do you think you're going to feel if all these things come to pass and the collapse of our society and economic system comes to fruition? You're not going to like it very much. It's going to be a thing that it's going to scar you for life. And I'm living proof that I escaped that. Final thought. I was born in a hospital that was called the butchery. The fact that I'm alive is a miracle. In Spanish, it was called la carniceria, the butcher shop. What a pleasant way to come into the world. Ask yourself if you want that for your grandkids, if you don't have any kids or you want your kids born into something like that. But thank you for your time. This is the Conservative Revolt. I hope to see you again. Like and subscribe. Share this information with other people. And I'll catch you on the next one.